relationships give us our identity. And it's typically relationships when we're young and relationships with God, so our parents and God. And then from that, we develop our identity, and from our identity flows our mission. I'd been living life upside down for over 50 years. I didn't have that identity from my early formation. Therefore, all the things I did, all my mission kind of cobbled together an identity. I'm the guy who knows this. I'm the guy who does that. And then from that, I hoped that I would have relationships where people would maybe love me, care for me, respect me. And you know how that worked? It didn't, because I kept trying to do more and more, and it did not fill the unfillable hole that I wanted for unconditional love.
And yet you were journeying through life, going from different places, both in the military and for your practice. You get married along the way, have many children. As you look back on that and you reflect on, at your identity being tied to whether or not you perform, what kind of impact did that have on your practice and your relationships? And then when did you discover that something needed to change?
Because of it, I suffered from anxiety and was on medication for over 30 years for the anxiety, because I could never meet up to these expectations. I never experienced unconditional love. So in my practice, the practice was just something I had to do. I had to do to support my family. I never really got much joy from it. And at home, as I discovered, I defaulted to things I could do well, but I didn't have a model. I didn't know how to be a father. I didn't know how to be a husband. So I often would disappear and do things I was good at. So those suffered also. And it's been gradually, with the patience of a saint of my wife over the years, but over some amazing things that have happened the last 2 years, that God has led me to healing. It started probably 5 years ago with a prayer to Saint Dymphna, the patroness of those with mental and nervous disorders. And a number of things have happened. And I'll let you guide how to telescope the many things, because it's been an amazing journey once I let God control it instead of me trying to control my own healing.
So that's a perfect transition to the next question I wanted to ask you, because I heard in that same talk, you talk about the difference between grasping and kind of trying to achieve your identity as opposed to letting it be bestowed on you. And you used the analogy of it like a tree of grasping as instead of the tree of gift that the Lord wants for us. How should we understand the difference between kind of grasping for our identity or letting it be bestowed on us?
It would be based on an analogy from the two trees in the Garden of Eden, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And if we're living life the way we're supposed to, the tree of life, our roots are grounded in love. We have security. And then based on the security, we can grow in maturity, like the trunk of the tree, grow to be like Christ, and then bear the fruit of maturity, of purity, which are the virtues. But instead, the other tree in the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, has a root of insecurity, because we aren't rooted and grounded in love, and therefore we are immature. I was immature. I've been immature, and we bear fruit of impurity. So that would be a tree of ungodly self-reliance or grasping, like you said. And so often we want to control life as human beings. I want to control my life. That was the weak point in my spiritual life, is control, which would of course lead to, probably the biggest sin that I would confess would be around anger. What's the antidote to that? The antidote to that is really letting God take control. And I had an interesting experience earlier this year in 2023. I was in charge of the CMA's involvement at Seek 23. And while there, I met the priest from my old college, said hi, bye, see ya. The following week, I resigned from everything I was doing in the CMA, because God wanted to heal me of my burnout and my anxiety. I went on a little hermitage retreat for 3 days. A priest there said, "Tom, you should pray this prayer of abandonment of St. Charles de Foucauld." Fine, Father, I'll do it. I get home from the retreat. The next day in the mail, I get this card with that prayer from that priest at the Sikh conference that the other priest at the hermitage had just recommended. Then a month later, I get this book based on that same prayer from a friend of mine. And the following week, I get that prayer texted to me. God wanted me to abandon myself. He was now leading me. And 2 weeks after starting to pray that prayer, you talked about my achievements. In this den where I'm recording now, I used to have a number of my awards and stuff on the shelves on the wall. They became absolutely repugnant to me. And I stripped my home of anything that had anything to do with achievement. And it was so freeing. So that was kind of the beginning of big things happening.
What that process of healing looked like. So he's getting your attention, saying, okay, trying to confront the lie that you're only lovable if you perform, or you're only great if somebody acknowledges, or all the various lies. So he's getting your attention. And so what does that look like practically? So you give the example of the rewards looking and feeling repugnant. That's very powerful. But what was emerging in you, and what were you doing about it as you began that healing process?
So a lot of the principles are in this book by Bob Schutz called Be Healed, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life he talks about. He also talks about the anatomy of a wound. We all have wounds, or we've been harmed by sin, our own sin and other sin. And around those wounds, we develop beliefs, usually false beliefs about ourselves and others. So because when I was young, I was told, you're not very bright, you don't have common sense, you're not going to amount to much, I developed the false belief, the lie about myself, others are only going to love me if I perform. And so then I developed a vow, an unconscious resolution that I'm going to be the smartest guy in the room, the most accomplished guy in the room, so no one can ever say I'm lazy or stupid, and maybe they will like me. So how did God get me to heal that wound at the center of this behavior, and probably the source of most of my confession material for decades? I was seeing a priest for deliverance prayer every week, and he was praying the prayer of St. Leo XIII over me and another deliverance prayer over me. And in March of 2023, one day while praying over me, I had the first ever mystical experience of my life. As he's praying over me, just praying the words, usually those sessions were dry as dust emotionally, I saw Mary stand up in my imagination, pointing her arm to the left side, saying to the demons to take off, and I broke down in deep sobbing tears in his office. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. After that, I had coming up 2 weeks later, something that Dr. Bob Schutz had offered me was to participate in this Healing the Whole Person retreat. And he had recommended this healing prayer that I've been praying, the 6-step healing prayer based on Catholic principles. And I always hit a barrier, never experienced the presence of Jesus in it. But on the second day of this retreat, he was leading us through that prayer. And all of a sudden, I was brought back to a memory when I was 7-year-old. Somebody was telling me, you're not very bright, you're pretty dumb. And all of a sudden, Jesus just comes in my imagination in a form I'd never seen, imagined, heard of, and just grabbed me from behind as a 7-year-old boy, just loving me in that moment when I was so hurt. And I just broke down, deep sobbing tears for half an hour. It's like, so this is what it feels like to be loved. The first time in almost 60 years of life, I felt unconditionally loved. Half an hour, that experience was worth everything and more than I'd ever accomplished in my life. Because after that, it's like that wound, it was healed. I don't have to prove anything to anybody in terms of accomplishments. And not to be outdone, the next day during that retreat, Sister Miriam James Heidland is leading us through another meditation. I just had something bad happen that day, was told one of my best assistants wanted to leave because she had no fun working for me. So I took this to Jesus. And again, I had another experience with him involving his Sacred Heart. And to prove I was changed, the next week, when that assistant who said she didn't want to worked with me for 2 more days, she went back to my CEO and said, I want to still work for him. Something's different. And now she still does. And she wants me to write her letter of recommendation for her to go to med school. So it's just been incredible since then.